Hello and welcome back to the next session of the Propertycast. Today I'm going to talk about flats versus houses. What are the better investments and which way should you start, and is there a way to diversify? I want to look at the pros and cons of flats versus houses and recommend a strategy. And it might well be having both flats and houses in your property portfolio. So let's get started. I'm going to look first of all at the advantages of flats. And the first one is that flats tend to be cheaper than houses. So typically when you get started with property, it's an effort to save enough money for your first property investment. And that's typically, let's say, £30,000-40,000 that you have saved. For that money, you will be able probably to buy a flat, but it's unlikely that you're able to buy a house. It's just simply more expensive buying a house, and therefore buying a flat is probably more advantageous starter option. Another advantage with buying flats is of course that maintenance is typically easier. So for once, you probably have a factor who's looking after your property. That means if there are any communal repairs to be done, then you can call on the factor, and if you have a half decent factor, they should be able to look after things like the roofs or gardening or issues with flooding or boundaries or so. Of course, if you own a detached or semi-detached property, so not a flat, then you're completely responsible for the maintenance. This can also be a disadvantage because when you're not in control of the maintenance or repairs in your property, you rely on other parties agreeing to any costs, and that can often lead to delays or action is not being taken at all. Wouldn't be the first time that I've seen a number of flats that have issues, let's say in the communal stairway. It needs repainting, it needs maybe new carpets in the communal areas, but some of them will be landlords, some of them will be living there themselves, cannot agree on a way forward, and then the factor could be stuck, or the factor is trying to get the right tradespeople in and they can't get good quotes, or the quotes are not agreeable to all people who have to make a decision, and that's a real downside. So in a flat there are advantages because it's easier, you don't have to handle all the maintenance, but it also means you're not always in control of the maintenance, and that could be a real disadvantage. So it's also important to look at the rental yields, and with each property you have to look at the individual financials for it. What is the purchase price? What is the rent coming in? What are the extra costs apart from your mortgage, I suppose? You might have factor fees, and they're typically there when you have a flat. There might be no factor fees, or there will be no factor fees if you own a property, a detached or semi-detached property, so a house. But I find that on balance, the rental yield, the gross rental yield, so what you get in divided into what you had to outlay to buy the property, tends to be better with flats, because you're basically buying a smaller footprint, but the flat can be rented out quite easily and for a decent amount of money. But of course, when judging any investment, you always need to put the figures into a spreadsheet and see which one is the better option, flats or houses. But in my experience, I would say flats have usually performed better. I will also have a video shortly coming about the financials that you need to consider when buying a property, and I will have a spreadsheet available for you to work with, and hopefully that will be helpful when deciding which property to buy. But for now, I would say on average flats probably give you better return than houses. Okay, another advantage for having flats is that often in city centers the demand from tenants is quite high, and typically as city centers have a restriction on the available land, you find that more flats are being built in city centers. So tenants want to be in city centers because of the convenience of having the train station, the bus station, the cinema, the supermarkets, and all of this. And there are more flats available in city centers than there are houses. So that is a clear pro for the flats. That means if you want to have something for city center dwellers, you should really invest into a flat and not houses. But of course, houses have also a lot of advantages, so let's cover them next. So first of all, and this comes back to maintenance and repairs. With your own house, you have complete control over how you carry out repairs and what maintenance you want to do. as much as you are responsible for everything and you have to shoulder the bills for everything, you also have complete control. So you get the quotes in, you work with the tradespeople that you prefer, and you don't have to rely on a third party organizing things, maybe not checking the work as you would like to have checked it, or going with a contractor that maybe you didn't like, or everything being completely delayed because your factor is particularly slow, which would be the first time in my experience. And then also with houses, one of the other advantages is that you don't have any factor fees to pay. Typically with a flat, you're looking at factor fees between £50 to £100 a month. And the factor takes care of the communal repairs, but also plant maintenance like cutting grass, cutting hedges, painting the inside of the building, the stairwell, repairing carpets, cleaning carpets, all those kind of things. And of course you pay for it. You pay for the actual work being done, but you also pay for the factor to do the work. The factor fees often also cover the building insurance, so that's not really a disadvantage because you have to get building insurance anyway, and if it is bought through your factor, that's typically a little bit cheaper than you can get it. But in general, if you have a house, then you're in complete control. You choose which insurance company to go with, you choose who to use for any repairs and maintenance, and you can check that the work has been done or is being done in the time that you want it to be done. So that's a clear pro for the houses. Then there's also the advantage of it not being able to be damaged by other people. Well, apart from maliciously somebody coming in and damage your house. But whereas in a flat, you have typically the scenario where maybe the tenant from above lets the bath overflow or has a leaking pipe and it will drain into your property. That doesn't happen with a house. You might damage it yourself, or the tenants might damage it themselves, but at least there's nobody else who could affect you. And I think that's a big advantage with a house. You're then completely not reliant on other people who are in the property or in the same house. It's just really your tenants. Another big advantage for houses is that you typically attract families. And the good thing about attracting families is that they tend to stay longer. So bigger property, i.e. a house versus maybe a flat, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom flat. You get a family. Families often have kids. The kids go to school. They want a bit of stability, and therefore they will stay longer. With flats, you typically attract younger people who are maybe a bit more mobile in terms of their jobs, where they work, when they leave again, when they have a partner, move out, move into something bigger. So with a property, with your own house, that is much easier. You attract normally families, and these families tend to stay longer. And longer tenancies, of course, means that you have fewer vacant periods. So periods where there is nobody in your property and the rent keeps being paid because you don't have those vacancies. And you don't have to re-advertise, you don't have to do another inventory, you don't have to do another checkout report. So having less turnover in your property is generally an advantage, and therefore that's a clear advantage or a clear pro for houses. Another small advantage is that you can offer your tenants more privacy than they would have in a flat. When I do viewings for flats, I often hear people say, but I don't want anybody who lives above me. I'm just used to it being quiet in my house or my previous accommodation. And if I now move into a flat, I don't want to have anybody above me. Or equally, I don't want to be careful with the noise I'm making if I have anybody below me. And of course, in flats, that is typically the scenario that you face. Whereas if you offer your tenants a house that they have complete control of, then there are no issues with privacy. Maybe if you have a semi-detached house, you should think about, is a good noise insulation so that your neighbors are not being too disturbed by your tenants, or equally, your tenants don't disturb the neighbors. But typically, with a house, you can offer your tenants more privacy. You also have the advantage to be able to offer your tenants a garden. Typically with a house, whether it's detached or semi-detached or even a terraced house, you would probably have a little garden to the rear. And again, that's more attractive for a lot of people, but definitely more attractive for tenants who are families, who have kids. So I think a garden is a big advantage. Of course, it comes with a responsibility for your tenants to look after the garden as well. And there can often be disputes depending on how was the garden presented when the tenant took it over. Have they looked after the garden? Which parts of the garden should they look after? Should they cut the hedges? Should they cut back trees? This is probably a whole other topic that I should get into, but in general, I would say a house comes with a garden, and therefore that is more attractive to a lot of people. Another big advantage is that houses typically have the opportunity to be extended or to be modified, whereas with a flat, that's normally not what you get. So with a house, expect, for example, that you would like to make a rear extension, or you could have a double height rear extension where you generate a bigger kitchen and then a bedroom up above. Or you might have the opportunity to go into the loft and build out the loft and generate another bedroom or two. Typically in a flat, you don't have those opportunities. Sometimes a flat could, of course, be reconfigured. And I've seen this a number of times where a clever landlord buys a flat that has one bedroom, a lounge, and a separate kitchen, all rooms being quite large, and they then reconfigure this flat to have 2 bedrooms and maybe a kitchen living room. And that way adding value to the property because they suddenly bring it from a 1-bedroom flat to a 2-bedroom flat. But I would say in general that far more applies to houses where you have opportunities to reconfigure. But of course, if you spot a good deal where you think this flat can be reconfigured and I can gain another bedroom or I can gain another room of use, then that might be an option as well. But I would say typically you have probably more flexibility to extend and amend when you have a house. Okay, another important one is capital growth potential. So you will know by now that when you look at a property investment, you're not only looking at the rent that comes in, the gross yield or the net yield, and we'll go into all of that in another video, but you will also want to achieve capital appreciation over the years. And often people say property values double over 10 years. I'm suspect. I don't think that is quite the case, and it will probably take longer. But of course, it also depends on the location. There are some fantastic growth locations like Manchester where you maybe achieve that over the last 10 years, and there are other areas like Aberdeen in Scotland where that is certainly not the case. So you have to weigh up, what is more important for you. Is it capital growth or is it the rental yield? But in general, I would say a house offers you a stronger potential for capital appreciation than flats do. So here's another tick for the houses. Okay, the last advantage for houses is there are simply fewer restrictions. You often come across the fact that in flats you have restrictions like you can't park a certain type of van outside, you can't have pets in your property, you can't run a business from the property. All these things might be restrictions that you have to impose on your tenants as well, and therefore the flat might be a little bit less attractive for tenants than a house could be. When you have a house, you're normally more in control of these things. You don't have other people you have to adjust to, you can run your own business, you can have as many pets as you want, and you can typically park a van in the drive. So that's another advantage that I would say goes in favor of houses. So to summarize, flats or houses? I think as I indicated in the beginning, flats are typically easier. You need to have less money to invest in them. Other people take care of a lot of the maintenance. Yes, you do pay a fee for it, but it's generally easier to buy, easier to run, and if you're in a city center location, it's just all round an easier option to find tenants for. However, on the flip side, houses give you a lot more control. Whether it's the maintenance, the extendability, the option to reconfigure houses, or what you do, whether your tenants can run their own business from there, park their van in the drive, or have as many pets as they want. They also offer you stronger opportunities for capital appreciation, which of course is very important. Now, in conclusion, I would say a mix of both types is probably the best approach. I would recommend starting with a flat because I think that's easier to get started with and it's cheaper. So if your first deposit only stretches to a flat, then I guess that option is very clear that you have to go with this. But from there on, if you have a bit more money, then I would say also try invest in a house and assess the option. Don't forget a good spreadsheet to see how the financials work out. and have a good think about the capital appreciation, which is also crucially important. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you for tuning in. If you like this video, press the like button, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you next time.